Today, we're putting together a list of the best American gangster and mafia movies ever made. 17 titles. No ranking, comparing them doesn't really make sense. Let's start with a Ridley Scott film. Loosely based on the real story of Frank Lucas and Detective Richie Roberts, American Gangster pulls together everything that works in classic gangster cinema. A sweeping, saga-like structure, gangsters placed firmly at the center of the story, a neutral, unsentimental look at how they think and operate, unfiltered violence, and just enough humor where it actually belongs. Naturally, plenty of details were reshaped for dramatic effect, but the core rise and fall arc remains intact. Frank Lucas, a mid-level criminal, rises rapidly through the underworld after setting up a heroin pipeline from Southeast Asia into the United States. By eliminating rivals and anyone who stands in his way, he comes close to the top. But in a police force riddled with corruption, there's one determined cop who sets out to bring the operation down and identify the man behind it. Lucas is played by Denzel Washington, brilliantly as expected, while the cop is played by Russell Crowe. I know a lot of people didn't like it when it first came out. Maybe expectations were just too high. But it's a must-watch. There was no way Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather trilogy wouldn't make this list. A defining gangster saga, one of the greatest achievements in cinema history, and a masterclass in screenwriting and direction. It also gave us what is arguably Marlon Brando's most iconic role, and launched Al Pacino to superstardom. At its core, the trilogy is about how a good man becomes a bad one. Michael Corleone wants nothing to do with mafia violence, yet gradually turns into a cold, calculating figure no different from the people around him. Part 2 mirrors this transformation by showing the rise of his father in a parallel storyline, tracing Vito Corleone's path as a young man, played by Robert De Niro. By Part 3, an aging Michael is trying to leave crime behind and move fully into legitimate business, but gangster stories rarely allow clean exits. No matter the code of honor, the justifications, or the attempts at redemption, the reckoning still comes. Subjectively, Part 2 stands out as the strongest entry, more intricate, more ambitious, and more emotionally complex. Part 3 may fall short of that standard, but it remains an essential and fitting conclusion to the saga. Bugsy is built around a character some viewers might remember from The Godfather, where he appeared under the name Mo Green. Here, Bugsy Siegel, born Benjamin Siegel, takes center stage. He was a real historical figure who got involved in organized crime at a very young age. According to legend, he helped shape the early image of Las Vegas as a glamorous gambling destination. The film focuses on that dream, the idea of building a city of fantasy with mafia money. Siegel, played by Warren Beatty, comes across less like a ruthless criminal and more like a romantic visionary. That's where Bugsy finds its distinctive tone. This version of Siegel feels less like a classic movie gangster and more like a man chasing an impossible dream. You could probably fill this entire list with gangster films from Martin Scorsese's filmography alone. Goodfellas is one of the finest examples of the crime saga format, based on Nicholas Pileggi's non-fiction book, Wise Guy. The story centers on Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta, a kid who dreams of becoming a gangster from an early age. He falls in with local mob figure Paulie Cicero, played by Paul Sorvino, and eventually teams up with the volatile Tommy DeVito, played by Joe Pesci, and the seasoned criminal Jimmy Conway, played by Robert De Niro. Together, they move deeper into a world that looks glamorous on the surface but is always loaded with danger. Watching this journey is endlessly compelling, largely because of Scorsese's direction. The story itself is straightforward, but the way it's told makes you want to come back to it again and again. The performances are flawless, the film is endlessly quotable, and its influence can be felt across countless crime movies that followed. Another, though not the last, Martin Scorsese film. The familiar pairing of Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci is joined here by James Woods and Sharon Stone. Once again, Scorsese is working from a literary source, and once again the story is partly based on real people and real events. De Niro plays a professional sports bettor with an almost supernatural instinct for numbers. There's no one better, so the mafia puts him in charge of running a Las Vegas casino. His operation is protected by his childhood friend, played by Pesci, and the arrangement might have lasted if not for two things. De Niro's character falls for a glamorous hustler played by Stone, and Pesci's volatile enforcer starts feeling that his old friend has gained a little too much power and independence. Like Goodfellas, Casino unfolds at a measured pace, but this time the emphasis is far more psychological. There's more drama, more tension, and more focus on toxic relationships in a world driven by money and crime. Black humor and brutal violence are very much present as well. Notably, after Casino, De Niro and Pesci wouldn't appear together in another Scorsese film until The Irishman in 2019. A rare and fascinating case where Sergio Leone stepped away from the Western and made a gangster epic instead. As with everything Leone touched, the result became a classic. The film tells the story of friends who grow up surviving on the streets of New York, facing not only the problems of adulthood, but the far harsher realities of a criminal life. Bootlegging, robberies, and organized crime become their path to success. But as always, the greatest dangers aren't just external. Betrayal often proves far more destructive. The film is loosely based on Harry Gray's semi-autobiographical novel, The Hoods. Noodles is played by Robert De Niro, while his childhood friends and later criminal partners are portrayed by James Woods and William Forsythe. The story unfolds in a non-linear structure, moving freely between Noodles' early childhood and his adult years. And over it all hangs the unforgettable music of Ennio Morricone. A cornerstone of gangster cinema and one of the defining crime films of all time. It's also one of Al Pacino's most iconic performances, and something many people forget, a remake. The original Scarface was released back in 1932. That said, I have no problem with remakes, and Brian De Palma's version more than justifies its existence. The film tells the story of a small-time Cuban criminal who arrives in Miami during the Mariel boat lift. In Miami, he builds a dream career in the drug trade. Rising from a street-level hustler to a full-blown boss, Pacino's character doesn't just reshape the world around him, he changes himself along the way. You could say for the worse, but even at the beginning, he was never exactly a model of virtue or restraint. In this business, survival means stepping over bodies, and if you want to rise high, you end up betraying everyone, partners, friends, and the people closest to you. Alongside money and mountains of cocaine, your constant companions become paranoia and the very real risk of violent death. Along with Pacino, Michelle Pfeiffer delivers one of the strongest performances of her career. Once again, Brian De Palma, and once again Robert De Niro, this time as Al Capone himself. The film follows the team of federal agents known as the Untouchables, lawmen led by Kevin Costner's Elliot Ness, a real historical figure with the film loosely drawing on real events. Ness's team includes a young Andy Garcia and a seasoned Sean Connery in one of the finest performances of his career, and a well-deserved Academy Award. The real challenge wasn't simply harassing Capone or disrupting his operations by seizing a shipment or two. The goal was to put the boss of Chicago's criminal empire behind bars, and that meant securing a conviction in court, which in turn required solid evidence. With witnesses intimidated or killed, widespread corruption among police, officials, and ordinary citizens, and a mafia willing to strike back, not just at the agents, but at their families, the task was almost impossible. To bring down Al Capone, it wasn't enough to be bulletproof. You had to be clever, inventive, and willing to fight the system on its own terms. Carlito's Way pairs Al Pacino with a very curly Sean Penn. The story is as old as the genre itself. A former gangster wants to stay former and leave his criminal life behind. But reality has other plans. Old connections, lingering loyalties, and both old and new friends make a clean break impossible. Compromise your principles once, and there's no real way back. You can probably guess where Carlito's path is headed. This is another successful collaboration between Pacino and Brian De Palma. Alongside Penn and Pacino, the cast also includes Penelope Ann Miller as Carlito's love interest and John Leguizamo in a memorable supporting role. A Bronx Tale is a landmark film and a special moment in Robert De Niro's career. Here he not only stars but also makes his directorial debut, and it's a remarkably confident one. De Niro plays a hard-working bus driver. Chaz Palminteri plays a local gangster. When the bus driver's young son witnesses the mob boss commit a murder, he makes a life-changing choice and refuses to identify him to the police, effectively saving the gangster from prison. In return, the grateful mobster begins to look after the boy, treating him almost like a son of his own. Naturally, the boy's real father strongly disapproves of this influence. The film is based on Palminteri's semi-autobiographical one-man stage play. In many ways, the boy at the center of the story is Palminteri himself. He agreed to sell the film rights only after De Niro promised him the role of Sonny and the chance to write the screenplay himself. With The Departed, Martin Scorsese finally received his long-overdue and well-deserved Oscar. The film is a remake of the Hong Kong thriller Infernal Affairs, directed by Andrew Lau and Alan Mak. I'll stay out of the which one is better debate. That's for you to decide. What matters is this: it's gripping, endlessly rewatchable cinema. Beyond Scorsese's direction, a big part of the appeal is the cast. Jack Nicholson plays the Irish mob boss. Leonardo DiCaprio is the cop sent undercover into the gang. Matt Damon is the mole inside the police working for the criminals. The premise is simple and brilliant at the same time. The mafia plants a mole inside the police while the police send an undercover officer into the mob. Sooner or later, those two are bound to collide. It would be strange not to include at least one film by the Coen brothers on this list. Crime, violence, and moral ambiguity are very much their territory, though not always in the form of organized crime. In Miller's Crossing, however, the focus is squarely on a gang war between Irish and Italian crime factions. Gabriel Byrne plays the trusted advisor to the Irish mob boss, portrayed by Albert Finney. When political maneuvering and personal loyalties begin to clash, Byrne's character finds himself trapped between rival factions. Shifting alliances become a matter of survival, and every decision carries real consequences. Around them, figures played by John Turturro and Steve Buscemi add layers of unpredictability and dark humor. As always with the Coens, the plot is intricate and ironic, filled with sharp dialogue and sudden violence. The film also contains clear nods to classic cinema. The opening scene echoes The Godfather, with a man approaching a mob boss to ask for protection. And later, in a tense staircase sequence, the slow approach of assassins recalls the good, the bad, and the ugly, where danger climbs step by step, almost ceremonially, before exploding. Black Mass is a somewhat underrated crime biopic built on real events. It tells the story of James Whitey Bulger, a volatile Boston gangster who was offered a deal that changed everything. Cooperate with the FBI, inform on rival criminals, and in return operate under a shield of protection. That arrangement turns a small-time mobster into something far more dangerous. Cynicism, lack of restraint, and near-total freedom create the perfect conditions for expansion. With law enforcement looking the other way, Bulger evolves from a local criminal into a dominant force in Boston's underworld. Johnny Depp delivers a genuinely unsettling performance. Not just physically transformed, but behaviorally altered. This is a completely different presence from the characters he's usually associated with. Kill the Irishman is yet another film based on real events, and another reminder that real life often comes up with stories no screenwriter would dare invent. At its core is the long-standing conflict between the Italian and Irish mob in the United States, this time centered in Cleveland. The film tells the story of Danny Green, a real-life figure who became deeply involved in racketeering and eventually built his own organization. The violent turf wars that followed led to a wave of bombings that shook the city. Ray Stevenson plays Green, giving the character a mix of stubborn charisma and dangerous unpredictability. The film also features appearances by Christopher Walken, Val Kilmer, and Vincent D'Onofrio, adding weight to this gritty, old-school crime story. Road to Perdition is another unconventional entry in the gangster genre, and one anchored by Tom Hanks in a rare and striking role. The city is effectively controlled by a powerful crime boss, played by Paul Newman. He rules with authority, eliminating threats and punishing disloyalty without hesitation. Among his most trusted men is Hanks's character, disciplined, loyal, and unwavering in his sense of duty. Everything changes when the sons become involved. Hanks's young son accidentally discovers what his father truly does for a living. At the same time, the boss's unstable and impulsive son, portrayed by Daniel Craig, makes a reckless decision that shifts the balance of power. Suddenly, Hanks's character becomes an enemy of the very family he served. The organization turns against him, sending men, including a cold, methodical killer played by Jude Law, to hunt him down. But this isn't just a story about mob rivalries or violent reprisals. It's a film about morality and consequence. After years of killing in the name of loyalty, Hanks's character begins to understand the cost of that life, especially for his own child. His only goal becomes protecting his son from inheriting the same fate. Because of that, Road to Perdition feels less like a traditional gangster saga and more like a deeply personal tragedy. And that shift makes it far more haunting. Gotti is a television film built on a real and highly compelling story. One of its biggest strengths is its cast, a lineup of actors who feel completely at home in the world of organized crime. Armando Sante plays John Gotti, delivering a commanding performance that anchors the film. Around him is a familiar ensemble of faces long associated with mafia cinema. Actors like William Forsythe, Frank Vincent, Dominic Chianese, Vincent Pastore, and Tony Sirico, along with the legendary Anthony Quinn. You might not remember every name, but you've definitely seen these faces before. When you assemble that kind of specialized cast, the result feels authentic almost by default. The story traces Gotti's rise from a boy growing up in a Neapolitan immigrant family in the Bronx to the powerful head of the Gambino crime family. He learned the rules of the street early and eventually came to control those same streets. This wasn't the first film about Gotti, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. His legacy, controversial and infamous as it is, remains too significant to ignore. And I'm closing this list with King of New York. Christopher Walken plays a New York drug kingpin who's just been released from prison. One by one, he eliminates his rivals, Colombians, Italians, Chinese gangs, consolidating power across the city. He even earns public sympathy by donating part of his profits to charity. But the NYPD has no intention of celebrating him. The police declare war, determined to bring him down at any cost.